Hey everyone, I am Robbie Coleman, one of the high school pastors here at Southside. And today we are starting a new series, What to Do When You Don't Know What to Do. This series is about Joseph and his life and the many circumstances he went through where he had absolutely no idea what to do in those situations. Austin's going to be bringing us this message, so go ahead and check out this bumper.
Thanks, Robbie. I want to start our time today by asking you all a question. And the question is this: do you ever feel like you live in two different worlds? I know for me, I personally think about my work life and my home life. And there are certain things that I will do at my house that I will not do here. For example, I love Disney movies, and particularly I love the songs in the Disney movies. My favorite is The Princess and the Frog, but you will never catch me blasting The Princess and the Frog in the office or at my desk. That's just not something that I do. Another example for me is when I go out in public, like with my family or something of that nature, I don't do public displays of affection. I don't hug my parents, or I don't hug even my grandparents for that matter. That's just not something that I do. And before you begin to judge me for not hugging my family in public, you need to know something, that you do it too. And it might look just a little bit different. For example, you might have your school life in your home life, or you might have your sports life in your home life, or you might have your band life or your home life. But whatever it may be, you have two separate worlds. And the fact of the matter is that we all act certain ways in certain places that we wouldn't act at home. For example, if you went to your friend's house, you wouldn't just leave your dirty laundry lying around on the floor, would you? Now, at your own house, you probably would do it and not think twice about it. Or at school, you wouldn't talk to a coach or a teacher the same way that you would talk to your parents. And same thing goes with a sibling. You might not pick on a teammate or a friend the way you would pick on your sibling. So why do we do these things? Why do we act completely different depending on where we are? And I have an assumption about this, and my assumption is that I want what I want when I want it. For example, when I go home, I walk in the house and I say, "What's for dinner?" And I want the answer to be something that I like. Or I may go out on the weekend and go out with my family and hang out and do some shopping, but really what I want to do is I want to go to the stores that I like. And that's just how I do it. And so for many of us, our home is our world and our family is just living in it. And the problem for most of us is that without even realizing it and without trying to do it, we change the entire vibe of our home, and sometimes not necessarily for the better. And so what happens is that when we start thinking, how does this affect me? We force the people in our homes to say, how are they affecting me? Which can cause a little bit of tension in our house. And so what do we do when things get tough at home? How do we handle that? And in this series, we're going to look at that, and particularly we're going to look at several stories or one particular story in the Bible about a man named Joseph. And here's the thing about Joseph: is Joseph had a lot of moments where he probably was saying, "What do I do?" But the interesting thing about Joseph's story is that it started with his very own family. And so what you have to understand about Joseph is that he was one of 12 sons, and what you really need to know is that he was the favorite. In fact, he was so favored by his father Jacob that his father gave him a robe that was really, really nice, and it made his brothers angry. And so what's so important about a robe, you might say? Well, getting a robe back then would kind of be like getting a new pair of Jordans or Adidas or maybe even some Yeezys, whatever it may be. But it was equivalent to that. And so he gets it, and his brothers become angry for that. Now, not only does he get the robe, but then to make matters worse, he goes and he has these dreams. And he goes to his brothers and he says, "Hey, I had these two dreams, and basically what they mean is that one day you're going to bow down to me and you're going to worship me." Now, you can see where this might cause a problem. I mean, if my younger brother came up to me and said, "Hey, I had a dream, Austin, and you're going to bow down to me one day," I wouldn't be too happy either. In fact, I'd probably be saying some words I can't say up here right now. So, that's what kind of goes on. You can kind of see where that would create a little bit of tension. And so, can you just for a second, I'm just imagining this scene where they're at the dinner table that night after everything has gone on. And I just kind of see it being very quiet, everybody kind of looking down at their plates, not a bunch of conversation going on. I mean, at this point, Joseph's brothers are probably over his robe. They're probably over the favoritism, and they're probably over Joseph as a person. And so I just imagine that scene, and I imagine the tension that is there. And so here's the thing about Joseph's story, though. Here's the thing that maybe you've never thought about before. I personally haven't thought about it, but Joseph was actually doing something that we all do a lot of times in our own homes. And he was being aware about how he was being treated, but not being aware of what it was doing to those around him. And so that's really important. And so we see that in this story about Joseph in the beginning of his life, and we see that going on. But the story of Joseph actually teaches us something very, very important. It actually teaches us three things. It says, it reminds us that the family life has always been complicated. Thousands of years ago, there was still tension between family members. There were still complications. It also teaches us that we need to pay attention to how we are affecting those around us. And it reminds us that when tension is not dealt with, then there can become problems that arise out of that. And next week, we're going to look more into what happened when this tension was unresolved. But here's the fact of the matter, too. Joseph's family was a lot like your family and my family in this way. And whether you're the favorite child or the athlete or the quiet one or the one that gets straight A's, whatever it may be, you have a role in your family. You have a say-so in what goes on in your home, and you have a say in the vibe that happens at your house. And so what Joseph is doing here is very, very interesting. And so what I want you to do is just think about a couple of questions. And the first question is, are you making things more tense at your house, or are you making things easier? And maybe you know the answer to these questions right now, and you say, well, what could I do to begin to take steps to make life easier at my house? Well, Paul actually gives us a really good starting point in Philippians 2. And in his letter to the church in Philippi, he gives us a great place to how we can start this process. And it says this, it says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Jesus Christ, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, and even death on a cross. So this is what Paul is telling us. He says, let's look at the example that Jesus Christ set when he came to earth. And Jesus came to earth, he humbled himself, came to earth, and what does he do? He goes around serving. He goes around being selfless. He goes around giving to others and helping those that he could. And that's the advice that Paul is giving us here. And that's what he tells us that we need to do, right? Like he tells us when we're in our homes, we need to begin to be less less selfish and more selfless. That's what we need to do. We need to begin to put others first, put those in our homes first. Maybe that's something like taking out the garbage, doing the dishes without being asked, whatever it may be. Maybe it's an encouraging word to somebody in your family, whatever that may be. But begin to put others first. And so that leads me to our bottom line today, which is this. Pay attention to how you treat your family, because the fact of the matter is that you have a say-so in the vibe that goes on at your house, and you can change that.
Man, Austin did fantastic on that message. I love his bottom line today. Pay attention to how you treat your family. I know through certain situations it can be so hard to do that, but it's so, so important. Make sure you stay connected with us on Instagram through Collide and Ignition. We'll see you guys later.